Hey Tots!
Hey, Viper.
Hey, can I ask you for a favour? A pretty big one, actually.
Nah, I don't mind doing you a favor. What do you have in mind?
Oh, it's just for a response video, but it's a real doozy and I need your help and, well, you're a lot smarter than me.
Oh, a response video? Who are we responding to? I'll watch the video so I can put something together for you.
Sure, okay.
Talking about transgender issues among adults is one thing, but what happens when a child is trans?
What? No, please God, no, not this, no, you monster!
There's no escape now.
Talking about transgender issues among adults is one thing, but what happens when a child is trans?
That probably means that they're going through some sort of phase because a child doesn't even understand their own body yet and how it works.
There have been plenty of stories in the media about children as young as 3 years old coming out as transgender, but most of the media is really bad at covering stories like these.
Tell me more, transgender individual who didn't know they were trans until they were in college, still likes to have sex with women and has no interest in actually transitioning. I'm all ears.
Somebody better get some ice because Riley's gonna need it after that burn.
They tend to sensationalize things to make them seem more extreme than they actually are.
Oh, so we should take young toddlers seriously when they say that they want to be the opposite gender. Silly kids, they understand so much more than adults do, who have been alive way longer and understands the complexities of gender in the human mind. How ageist of me.
Because of that, I think a lot of people have some deeply ingrained misconceptions about what it means for kids to come out as trans.
Misconceptions or facts that hurt your feelings? There is a difference between the two.
So let's run through some of these myths. Myth number 1, transgender children immediately start taking hormones that cause irreversible changes. No, in fact, depending on how young they are when they come out, some trans kids might go years without any kind of medical intervention.
Well, I'm glad to hear that not all parents seriously take their children's whimsical fantasies and imagination to heart. But I have a feeling that that's not where you're going with this point.
Not to mention that the doctors would actually look for different signs when trying to diagnose a child as young as 3 with gender dysphoria, especially when comparing those signs to that of a teenager or an adult. But because of these signs, the treatment will be different. The NHS website states, gender dysphoria behaviours in children can include insisting they are of the opposite sex, disliking or refusing to wear clothes that are typically worn by their sex and wanting to wear clothes typically worn by the opposite gender, disliking or refusing to take part in activities and games that are typically associated with their sex and wanting to take part in activities and games typically associated with the opposite sex, preferring to play with children of the opposite biological sex, disliking or refusing to pass urine as other members of their biological sex usually do. For example, a boy may want to sit down to pass urine and a girl may want to stand up. Insisting or hoping their genitals will change. For example, a boy may say he wants to rid of his penis and a girl may want to grow a penis. Feeling extreme distress at the physical changes of puberty. Most treatments offered at this stage are psychological rather than medical or surgical. This is because the majority of children with suspected gender dysphoria don't have the condition once they've reached puberty. Psychological support offers young people and their families a chance to discuss their thoughts and receive support to help them cope with the emotional distress of the condition without rushing into more drastic treatments.
The process recommended by the Endocrine Society is that a child doesn't receive any kind of treatment until the Tanner 2 stage of puberty, which can happen anytime between 8 and 15 years old depending on the individual.
So you're still going to allow an 8-year-old to transition? Or at least take puberty blockers anyway? Dude, when I was 9, I wanted a penis so I could pee standing up. Like, that was it.
You expect an 8-year-old who doesn't understand the full scope of a big decision such as this to make a big decision such as this? If you're too young to consent to sex, then you're too young to consent to a sex change.
At that point, the child is prescribed a puberty blocker, the most common of which is gonadotropin-releasing hormone, or GnRH. Puberty blockers have been studied for decades as a treatment for precocious puberty, basically early puberty.
Yes, those hormones that are used to block puberty are meant for children that hit puberty way too early, way sooner than they're supposed to, not stop puberty when it's supposed to happen.
And they've been proven to be safe and effective.
I agree that puberty blockers are safe when used in short term or for its proper use. Being maybe a gender dysphoric teenager using puberty blockers for 2 years between the ages of 14 and 16, or between the ages of 16 and 18, or, as I said, its proper use to stop the early onset of puberty in very young children. But what people are asking is, what's the long-term effects of being on very long-term puberty blockers? For example, from the age of 8 to the age of 18. This is what people are asking. What damage have these children done to their body? Have their brains not developed properly? What's their bone density like? And yes, fertilization is still a factor, but there haven't been many studies to prove any long-term side effects. So to say it's safe isn't 100% true, because there are still risks that we don't know about.
Puberty blockers simply delay the onset of puberty. The reason for this is that it gives the child more time to consider their gender identity and potentially to work with a therapist to figure everything out. Puberty blockers can be stopped at any time with no negative or irreversible effects if the child decides that they don't want to continue with the treatment.
What 16 or 17-year-old boy wants to run around with the voice and body of a 10-year-old? I understand that late bloomers are a thing, it happens naturally, but to purposely do that, I feel like there's something really wrong. You're delaying a natural cycle that the body has.
Puberty blockers do not cause sterilization, and if they're stopped, puberty will start just like normal. At the age of 16, the Endocrine Society recommends that children be given the option to start hormone replacement therapy. For people who are assigned male at birth, this is generally a testosterone blocker and estrogen. For people who are assigned female at birth, this is generally just testosterone. For trans people, getting on hormones before puberty can be a huge relief. Puberty causes a lot of irreversible changes that can end up worsening their gender dysphoria in the future.
I wouldn't even trust a teenager to make this decision for themselves. When you go through puberty, when you're a teenager, everything is so dramatic. Nobody understands you, it's the end of the world, and you're not thinking logically. Because you have so many hormones rushing through your body and you're so insecure about yourself already, this decision could just be another one of those the world doesn't understand me type things.
One study of 55 trans people found that proper treatment in their adolescence alleviated their gender dysphoria in adulthood and resulted in a much higher overall well-being. The worry that a lot of people have is that if a child starts to take hormones and then changes their mind, the hormones could have caused some irreversible changes to their body, like breast or facial hair development. And yes, it's important to make sure that teenagers are aware of these possibilities before they start treatment. But either way, irreversible changes happen as a result of puberty anyway.
The problem is being trans has suddenly become trendy. They're going to see things in the news, they're going to see things like that National Geographic cover, and they're going to think, oh, I want to fit in with them, I want to be like them. So in order to fit in with the crowd and be cool and popular, they're going to want to do something like this. That's something that kids and teenagers do. They want to fit in with the crowd. So they're possibly making a decision that's going to affect their entire life based on just wanting to fit in.
So what this is really about is figuring out which changes will be best for the teenager in the long run. The best way to do that is to make access to therapists with experience in trans issues more accessible, not to deny people of their right to choose what happens to their own body.
I agree, Riley. I think counselling should be made available. I think we should have access to counselling if a child appears to be gender dysphoric, because what counselling could reveal is that this is just a phase, it is just a part of growing up. We shouldn't immediately start talking about puberty blockers and hormones, that's certainly true, and counselling is part of the treatment. We should love and support that child, and maybe later on down the line, when they're 18 years old, then they could start thinking about hormones and changes to their body, because then their body is their own, and they have a better understanding of who they are.
You're right. Everybody has a right to their own body and to do whatever they want with their body, after the age of 18 years old.
Because at the end of the day, this is an issue of choice, and I think that teenagers have the right to decide what happens to their bodies, especially when they are the ones who have to be stuck with the result for the rest of their lives.
Precisely. You get one body your whole life, and any changes that you do to your body, it's going to be permanent. Would you let your 8, 9, or 10-year-old get a tattoo or a body piercing, even though they really, really wanted one and they felt like they should really, really have one? If you're going to say no to that, then why would you let your kid transition?
After that step, some trans people might elect to have genital reconstruction surgery after they turn 18, but at that point, they're legal adults and can make whatever decision they want.
Speaking of genital reassignment surgery, if we're talking about male to female trans people and they were to go on puberty blockers at a young age and therefore hinder the development of the penis, then it's actually quite possible that they might not be able to get a vaginoplasty later on in life. What I mean by this is a technique of actually turning the penis inside out to create a vagina. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't other options. There is a skin graft option and a colon tissue option, I believe, but they have to be discussed. But what would actually happen to the mental state of that trans woman if they find out that they might not be able to get a vaginoplasty because of the puberty blockers they took earlier on in life?
Plus, some trans kids might not choose to take puberty blockers or hormones or have surgery, but their gender identity should still be respected.
That makes no sense at all. Somebody who is transgender is actually making the effort to transition, hence transgender. They transfer genders. Anything else is just cross-dressing.
Multiple studies have shown that social acceptance of a child's gender identity leads them to have much better mental health. Myth number 2, hormones make all trans people infertile. There's actually been very little research done on this topic. Most doctors will tell you that after starting hormones, there's no guarantee that you'll remain fertile, but some trans women and some trans men still go on to have biological children after being on hormones. It's not known exactly how likely it is for hormones to make someone infertile or how long you have to take them before the changes are irreversible. Anyone who claims that all trans people are sterile is just lying.
I wouldn't really say that they were lying. I'd say that it was more of an over-exaggeration, a hyperbole. Yeah, not all trans people become sterilized, but it is the norm.
However, with trans teenagers who go straight from puberty blockers to hormones, they never experience natal puberty, and therefore will probably be infertile, though again, there's never been any solid research on this.
So unless these teenagers actually come off puberty blockers before they go into hormones to allow themselves to go into puberty and therefore become fertile, it is possible that they could be infertile because of the puberty blockers. Do you not see what you've just said, Riley?
Trans teens who want to preserve their fertility can choose to begin natal puberty, save their eggs or sperm, and then start hormones if they want to. It's really a choice that is up to them. But honestly, I think we put far too much emphasis on a person's ability to have biological children. Plenty of cis gay couples and cis lesbian couples are unable to have biological children, and they're just fine.
Yes, they can have their own biological children. They can either get a surrogate mother, or they can get sperm that had been donated by somebody else.
Adoption is always an option, and some people don't even want kids. For instance, a straight trans woman who ended up with a cis guy wouldn't be able to have biological children with him anyway. It's important to talk about the effect hormones have on fertility and to make that information readily available to anyone considering starting hormones, but it's not a reason to prevent somebody from transitioning. This is not children sterilizing themselves as some people would frame it. This is teenagers accepting the side effects of a treatment that will more than likely make them happier in the long run.
If it really leads to happiness, then why does almost half of the transgender community at least attempt to commit suicide? It's almost as though changing your outward appearance doesn't really change how you feel deep down inside. Who would have thought?
Myth number 3, it's just a phase and they'll regret it when they're older. Nope, it's extremely unlikely that they will regret it. Though a few stories about someone detransitioning have made headlines, those cases are actually super rare.
Hate to break it to you, Riley, but for children, it is just a phase. It's all part of growing up. On the same NHS website, it states, children with gender dysphoria may display some or all of these behaviours. However, in many cases, behaviours such as these are just a part of childhood and don't necessarily mean your child has gender dysphoria. For example, many girls behave in a way that is described as tomboyish, which is often seen as a part of normal female development. It's also not uncommon for boys to role-play as girls and to dress up in their mother's or sister's clothes. This is usually just a phase. Most children who behave in these ways don't have gender dysphoria and don't become transsexuals. Only in rare cases does the behaviour persist into teenage years and adulthood.
2 studies done in 1992 and 1998 found that only 1 to 2% of people who transitioned later regretted it. I found 4 more studies on the topic. One of them found that no trans people in the study regretted their transition, and the other 3 found rates of 1.2%, 2.2%, and 3.8%, all of which are very, very low. This means that in the vast majority of cases, somewhere between 96% and 99% of trans people who publicly transition don't regret it.
Did they transition as children or teenagers, or did they transition as fully actualized adults who already knew exactly what they wanted in life after sitting and thinking about it for a very long time?
That's a really high success rate, and all of these studies note that most of the people who regretted their transition didn't actually feel that they weren't transgender. They just no longer wanted to deal with society's treatment of them. Most of them cited an inability to pass, lack of acceptance among friends or family, and an inability to get a job as reasons for regretting their transition. What this tells us is that a very tiny percentage of trans people regret their transition, and most of these people only regret it because of hateful external forces, not because because they misidentified their own gender. Myth number 4, being transgender is a fad, and these kids just want to fit in. Look, no one's choosing to be transgender because they think it's cool. We're not like recruiting trans people and encouraging everybody to be trans.
I have one word for you. Tumblr.
It is fashionable to be transgender. It is a fad to be transgender. With the media sensationalising transgender people like Caitlyn Jenner calling her stunning and brave, with TV networks like TLC putting out a reality show about a transgender girl named Jazz, and now this National Geographic cover saying that a 9-year-old boy dressed in purple and pink is a girl and calling it a gender revolution. Children would look at that and go, I want that. I want my 15 minutes of fame. I want to be popular. It is a fashion statement to be transgender nowadays. And how do you think that will affect real transgender people if they come out as transgender? Most people might just roll their eyes and go, yeah, whatever. That would affect them even more in their mental state, in their mental instability, in their gender dysphoria. Even people like you, Riley, you trans-trenders, have to take some responsibility for this. You talk about how you have gender dysphoria, but you don't take the full transition. You don't take the hormones. You don't take the puberty blockers. In fact, you just wear a dress, put on eyeliner, and grow out your hair and say you're a girl, and that's it.
I don't care if you're cis or if your kid is cis, everybody's gender is their own business. But if a kid is actively questioning their gender, I think the appropriate response is to listen and to try to help them figure it out, not to shout them down and tell them how they feel.
I agree. You should never, ever, ever yell at your kids for being curious about something. But more often than not, stuff like this is just a phase. A lot of kids are really curious about what it's like to be the opposite gender. I remember specifically when I was a kid, I was really curious as to what it was like to be a boy. I didn't want to be a boy, but I just didn't know what it was like to be a boy because I had always been a girl. They had different parts than I did. In this day and age, I can see how that's easy to muddle, how it's easy to misinterpret, because now simple curiosity that children have for the opposite gender can be construed as wanting to be that gender. There's a difference between being curious and wanting to know what it's like being a boy or a girl and actually wanting to be a boy and a girl. You can't conflate a child's imagination and curiosity with how they really feel.
That's why therapists are generally recommended for all trans people, but especially for trans kids, because they can help the child work through their feelings about gender and figure out if they are trans or not. Sometimes cis kids will question their gender and they'll talk it over and they'll figure out they're still cis, and that's fine too. Though for most children who come out as trans that early, they're not even questioning their gender. They're very sure of it.
How many toddlers and children have you been around? Do you know how quickly a toddler will jump from phase to phase? They're so sure that they like something one day, and then the next day they absolutely hate it and want nothing to do with it. Yes, there are some cases where toddlers and children know for a fact that they want to be a boy or a girl. But the risk is not worth the outcome in that instance. Like, when you are that young, you're not sure of anything yet, and you can't be trusted to make any life-altering decisions, no matter what. Now, if you have these tendencies at a very young age, and you end up growing up with these tendencies, then yeah, I'd say you're transgender, but you cannot tell with a toddler. You just can't.
For some trans people, it might take them years to figure out what their gender is, but for a lot of trans kids, they just know, and they're adamant about it. People know the risks of being transgender. They know it's not easy. Trans people face discrimination everywhere, and nobody's choosing to be trans any more than a cis person chooses to be cis.
So, let me get this straight. You think that an 8-year-old, because according to you, the Tanner 2 stage starts at 8 years old, generally. So, an 8-year-old can conceptualize 60, 70 years in the future. Okay, they have the ability to think about themselves far into adulthood. They have the ability to think that far ahead. Really? Really?
They're just figuring out their gender. Myth number 5, allowing a child to medically transition is child abuse.
I wonder where Riley got this myth from.
Now let us praise Blair White, for she is awesome.
I've heard this argument. People say that allowing your child to take puberty blockers or hormones is child abuse because they can't consent to it under the age of 18. But I would argue that preventing them from transitioning when they are 100% sure that it is the right path for them is much closer to child abuse.
So if little Johnny down the road began to identify as a Maori warrior and asked his parents to get Tomoko tattoos on his face, If his parents denied his request to get tattoos on his face, would his parents be considered abusive because they're not respecting his identity?
I would only believe little Johnny if he started doing the hacker and started sticking out his tongue as a symbol of saying, after I kill you, I'm going to eat you. Or he starts training for the New Zealand rugby team. But Riley, if we follow that logic, then my parents committed abuse against me because when I was 5 years old, they didn't let me go look for Zordon because I wanted to be a Power Ranger.
Like I said before, irreversible changes through hormones usually don't even happen until 16 years old at the earliest, and at that point, they're definitely informed enough to make a decision about which puberty they want to go through. At 17, we expect kids to choose a college and a career path and usually put themselves in tons of debt.
So you're saying that a adult puts themselves in tons of debt because they don't know enough about the world yet to work the system properly, and you expect people younger than them to be able to make a decision, a life-altering decision. Makes perfect sense.
But we can't expect them to know what is right for their own bodies? That's ridiculous. Every child deserves the right to bodily autonomy.
No. If you give a kid complete and total bodily autonomy, they're never going to get vaccinated, they're never going to go to the doctor, they're never going to go to the dentist, and they're going to eat nothing but cake and candy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day.
Imagine if you denied your child access to puberty blockers and hormones, causing them to go through natal puberty, and then their gender dysphoria became more severe as a result.
What if halfway through hormone treatments, your kid realizes that they don't want to be trans anymore?
And by the time they could start hormones later in life, their mental health was already severely impacted by their dysphoria. That's what we really need to prevent. The point of all of this is just let children be trans.
No, we should let children be children. We should let them grow and develop in their own way and not force ideologies onto them. If one day they're saying they're a girl and the next day they're saying they're a freaking transformer, let them. Look, children have imagination. They think the world is full of mysticism and wonder and it's not bogged down by reality. Let children be children. Don't force them to be trans if at 4 years old they say, I'm a girl, mommy. I want to wear a dress. You should love and support your child. That is it. You should let children be children. Let them have their imagination. Let them grow and develop and go through phases. Let them like a certain TV show one day and hate a certain vegetable the next. Don't force ideologies upon them. Let them be children.
No one is forcing anything on them, and they'll be happier and have better mental health if you just learn to accept them.
You know what? You're right. I'm gonna go talk to Joey down the street's parents and let them know that it's okay that he gets Tomoko tattoos. You have a good day, Riley.
Hey, Barbara! Riley on the internet said that your son can get facial tattoos. Yeah, he said it was cool. No, he said if you don't let him, it's abuse. Alright, talk to you later, Barbara.
I now fear for Barbara's little Johnny. This can't be good. And that's the end of the video, guys. I hope you liked it. I would like to thank Trigger Tots for helping me do this collaboration. Because honestly, without her, I don't think I would have ever been able to do this video. Even though really I could have left this video all to her to begin with. You're amazing and I owe you one tot. Even though I kind of forced you into it. So comment your thoughts below, guys. I would love to hear from you. Bye!